Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Soul-Centered Astrology Summit. I'm your host, Suzanne Gerber, and I'm very excited about today's interview. My guest is Divine Harmony, an astrologer, a mystic, author, and teacher who I very much associate with the divine feminine. Today, she's going to be sharing about a subject some of you may be familiar with. Others not in the least. Either way, I think you're going to come away with some new perspectives and insights. In a presentation she's calling Solar and Lunar Standstill, Calling in the Light, Harmony will explain what standstills are, what the significance is for the collective, and how to work with these energies in your own life. It is my pleasure to welcome Divine Harmony back to the summit. Hi, Harmony.
Hi. Thanks for having me.
It's always great to do anything with you, so I'm very honored that you're here. And I know this is a subject very close to your heart, which you're going to share about. And I think a good place to start, and I know you've got this covered, is what do we even, people know what solstices are. Um, People know what equinoxes are, but I don't know if they know what standstills are. So can you start and give us a context for this?
Yes, I actually will be going into this in the presentation. So let me open up here we go, Solar and Lunar Standstills, Calling in the Light. So this is a beautiful picture of the sun actually on the right that I snapped with my camera. It's in a eucalyptus grove in Ojai, California, which is the Valley of the Moon. And I was actually there to see owls. There were a bunch of owls. And I just snapped this picture and this is what came through. I was like, wow, what an amazing picture of the radiance and the brilliancy coming off the sun. So what I want to talk about today are standstills, and there's solar standstills and there's lunar standstills. And we're going to talk about what they are and what they mean, starting with the solar standstill, which is the solstice. There's summer and winter. And I'm going to talk about the 8 holy gateways of the sun because they're connected to that. And also specifically talk about the declinations of the sun because that's a part of the picture when we talk about standing still. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about solar maximum, which we're supposed to be either in right now or about to head into, and how that also can affect the solar standstill. And then I'm going to talk about lunar standstills, and they're actually called lunistices. And there's major and minor. They're connected to the 4 Aries points and the vessel of love in human design, if you know your human design. And I'll talk about the out of bounds moon and constellations that the moon reaches. And then I'll talk about some sacred sites aligned with the sun and the moon, and then how you can work with this in your own chart, in your own being, how you can engage with the living sky, and more. So let's dive in and we'll start talking about the solstice, when the sun stands still. So solstice comes from the word solstitium, which literally means sun stands still. And we have 2 solstice points. We have the winter solstice and the summer solstice. And we have them on the northern hemisphere or the southern hemisphere. They're just reversed. And I will say this talk, I'm going to mostly be speaking from the northern hemisphere perspective. But when there are times that there's differences, I will point out what those differences are if you're under the equator. So winter, whether you're in the north or the south, whenever you have winter, it's the lowest point in the sky that the sun reaches at solar noon. Solar noon doesn't mean noon exactly everywhere. It just means what is the point of the sun's highest point in that day, in that season, wherever you are on the earth. Summer is the highest point in the sky that the sun reaches at solar noon. And this is why we have shorter days of light in winter and longer days of light in summer. Of course, it varies where you live. I was raised in Hawaii, which is close to the equator. There's a lot less variation with the sun in summer and winter when you're by the equator. But if you're more close to the poles oh, you get dramatic differences. I remember lived in Washington State. I went to college there, and in the summer, we would have the sun up till like 10 o'clock at night. And I was just like, what? I'd never experienced that in Hawaii. It was like kind of crazy. It was an amazing experience, but it was very different than living by the equator. Also, at the solstices, there's different rise and set points for the sun as well. And the solar cycle is 1 year. So here's just a visual of the highest point of the summer sun, summer solstice, and then the highest point of the winter sun, winter solstice. You can see how big of a difference that is. And I'm going to show a few other images. These images on the right are from Universe Today. So you can see in the upper image, look at how this December, so this is from the Northern Hemisphere perspective, December is the winter solstice sun for us in the north. December for you in the south is your summer. So you're going to reverse these. But you can see that the winter sun in December only goes so high in the sky, but the summer sun goes way higher. And the visual on the bottom shows you from another perspective how high the summer sun goes versus how low the winter sun goes. It also shows you, the autumn and the spring, fall or spring in the middle. And again, keep in mind, if you live closer to the poles, more northern declinations, like northern Scotland is 58 degrees north declination, there's a lot bigger swing you're going to see than if you live closer to the equator. So there's also a difference in the sunrise and the sunset points at the solstices. So this is an image by Marcella Giulia Pace, and this is actually the sunset, but it also corresponds to the sunrise. In winter, the sun sets way more south. If you tracked the sun on the horizon every day throughout the whole solar year, you would see the sun set at the most southern point, west-southwest, at winter solstice. On the flip side, at summer, you're going to see it rise, or rather, sorry, this is set more north. And then right smack in the middle is actually the equinoxes. So one of the best ways to be able to tell where due east and due west are is on the sunrise and sunset of the equinox, because the sun rises precisely east on the equinox and the sun sets precisely west on the equinox. And so you didn't just see the sun go higher in the summer or lower in the winter. You also saw it rise and set at different points on the horizon. And this was very important to ancient astronomers and astrologers. They paid attention to this. It was part of the cyclic journey of the sun. Now, this is also part of the 8 solar gateways of the sun. There's 8 gates. If you take the whole year and divide it into 8, the first 4 you divide are going to be the solstices and the equinoxes. So those are the 4 seasons. But there's also mid-seasons. There's mid-winter, mid-spring, mid-summer, mid-fall, and they are the midpoints between the solstices and the equinoxes. And these are all from the Northern Hemisphere perspective. So if you're in the South, you know, 0 Capricorn is actually your summer, not your winter. It's our winter up here. So just keep that in mind. The 8 solar gateways, the high holy days of the sun, are actually really tied to the agricultural mysteries. So back in the day when we didn't have fake sun and the ability to grow plants at any time of the year and all kinds of things happening that we have today, they were very attuned to nature and the land. And really working with the sun and the gates of the sun were not just an inner process, psychological, spiritual, but also like a literal external process in terms of growing and harvesting and planting and reaping. So winter solstice is the first gate of the sun because it's the gate at which the sun is reborn. It's the gate of birth or rebirth. It's the rebirth of the sun because the sun goes as low in the sky as it will, and then it stops and it stands still. And I'm going to show you a picture of declinations in a moment. And then after a few days, it starts to imperceptibly rise again, and it's the rebirth of the sun. Now, if you imagine in nature, all the things that die and drop to the ground, they become the mulch that goes into the earth. And seeds that have fallen in the earth will start to emerge at midwinter, at Imbolc. It's not going to be full-on greenery, but you'll start seeing little sprouts coming through, like the snow, for example, if you live somewhere where there's snow. And so you start to see something emerging at Imbolc midwinter. Now, spring is when spring has fully sprung. You know, it's the gate of resurrection. You literally see that life is back after the death of winter. Flowers are everywhere, bees are buzzing, birds are nesting, and all kinds of things are happening. Life is, you know, definitely fertile. We're past winter, so we don't need to worry anymore. Think back when we didn't have heat or lights or grocery stores. This was important. Once you got to spring, you knew you were going to be okay until the next winter came, in terms of, you know, do you have enough food? Are people going to die of sickness? That kind of thing. Beltane is mid-spring, is the gate of union and fertility. Now, this is a time when the full throttle fertility of the earth is happening. Like, there's no mistaking that winter is gone. It's not just spring. It's like the fullness of spring, and that's the gate of union and fertility at Bealtaine, which is how it's correctly pronounced. And then summer solstice is Letha. So this is the gate of ascension and enlightenment, because it's the point that the sun reaches the highest point in the sky. The highest point it can reach for the light is summer solstice. So we've got the rebirth of the sun at winter solstice. We've got the sun reaching the highest point of light at summer. And then the sun starts to descend. And at Lugnasa, it's the gate of sacrifice and harvest. It's actually traditionally one of the first of 3 harvest festivals. Typically, back in the day when it was like harvesting based on nature, it would be the harvest of grains, then fruit, or is it fruit, then grains, and then nuts. But now we harvest at all different times. And it is the gate of sacrifice. And part of that is because the sun sacrifices itself. It starts to descend. It's no longer reaching for the highest point of light. It's coming down. And literally at Lugnasa, when the sun is at 15 Leo, you notice the difference of where the sun is in the sky. Then we get to fall equinox, Mabon. It's the gate of truth and balance. This is the tipping point for us in the Northern Hemisphere. We tip into the dark half of the year. And it's also the Libra scales of balance. Part of this actually is the truth, you know, the truth part of this solar gateway is, what have we stored for the winter ahead? Back then, the harvest festivals weren't just like fun things where you harvest what you've planted, like you're storing for the winter. And what you do or do not have informs how you'll get through winter. If you had a bad harvest, you could be kind of screwed for winter. And so this gateway, this truth and balance gateway, was tied into that as well. And then the final one is Samhain, or mid-fall. It's essentially the equivalent of the dark of the sun. So we have dark moon, also known as balsamic moon, you know, the last 3 3¾ days of the lunar cycle. Well, Samhain is the dark of the sun. It's the gate of death and final descent. And, you know, whatever hasn't been harvested, wasn't good enough to harvest, it falls to the ground, it decays, it starts becoming mulch. We'll have darker days, the trees are going to start losing their leaves, everything looks like death, you know. I live in Asheville now. I grew up in Hawaii, so the seasons were very different there, but in Asheville, the landscape is so striking, because literally we don't have, on the West Coast, we have a lot of evergreen trees, so they don't lose their leaves, you know, they stay looking like trees. Not over here. Everything, almost everything, loses its leaves. And it's just the sparseness, the starkness of the landscape is so striking. I call them naked trees. My daughter thinks I'm weird when I say that. I was like, look at the naked trees. And she's like, Mom. Anyhow, they are naked though, and it looks like they're dead. They send all the energy into their roots so that they can survive through the winter. And then it starts over again with winter solstice and the rebirth of the sun. So you can see that the solstices are these two turning points in these 8 solar gateways. One is the rebirth of the sun and the start of the solar cycle, winter solstice. The halfway point is summer solstice, the reaching for the highest light. And then we descend and come back again. And it's literally a cycle of ascension, reaching for the light, and descension, bringing the light down and in. Or what I like to say is enlightenment and embodiment. And it's the yin and yang of, the solar cycle. So the solstices are these turning points. And actually, solstitium, the sun stands still, literally the sun stands still twice a year. Once at the highest point, once at the lowest point, and it actually stands still for 3 days at the same declination. So this is a declination image from AstroPixel, who does it's a great website where they have all the declinations for everything, and it's like a lot of data, but if you're into research and stuff, it's a great resource. I recommend checking it out. This is for this year, June 2024. Oops, what just happened? I went to December. So here, if you look, 23 degrees, 26 minutes, and this is the seconds, but 23:26 is repeated 3 times here, right? On June 20th, 21st, and 22nd. The solstice is actually on the 21st. And so we have 3 days of the sun literally standing still at the same degree and minute of its declination. The seconds show that the 21st is the winter, but not by much. And I'll tell you that it's not perceptible to the naked eye at all. Now, I will say we had a leap year this year. So we had an extra day on February 29th. This year, it's these 3 days, 20th, 21st, and 22nd. But actually, the other years, when we don't have an extra day, this falls on the 21st, 22nd, and 23rd. And the 24th is actually the day that the sun starts to descend. And if you know your myth, there's actually a bunch of midsummer festivals throughout a lot of European cultures like Latvia and Sweden. And this June 24th is the day that they celebrate St. John the Baptist. And there's a reason for that, because in the Bible, St. John the Baptist says, I must decrease so he can increase. St. John the Baptist's birthday or celebration day is the day that the sun begins to decrease. And Jesus is born on the day that the sun begins to increase. And it's tied to the solar mysteries. So here's December for this year. You see 23:26. It's actually only showing for 2 days. In part, this is also because of leap year. The other years, you'll see it for 3 days, and it goes 22nd, 23rd, 24th. It's on the 24th to the 25th, Christmas Day, Christmas Eve, and Christmas Day, that the declination starts to imperceptibly rise again. And this is why there's many sons of God or goddess being born at this time. It's not just the birth of Jesus. It's also the time of the birth of Dionysus and Tammuz and Horus and many other sons of God and sons of the goddess. And it was actually timed intentionally. So that's the solstices. Now this year, 2024, we actually are in solar maximum. Now the solar cycle is weird. It ranges. So we have a cycle that can go anywhere from 8 to 13 years. And the average is about 11. And it's very hard for the scientists to predict because of this. Because you can't just go, oh yeah, it's always 8 years or it's always 13 and then just divide it in half. It doesn't work like that. So they can only determine solar max at least 7 months after solar max has happened, because they need the data. It's literally based on the peak of solar activity and the solar flares. And you can only tell when the peak was after it started to go down. So you need to wait a bit. And there's all these articles that are out saying that we are probably in solar max. We're heading into it right now, this year, or into 2025. And they're not sure yet. So it's, you have to wait until after it's done to know when it happened. Solar maximum corresponds with way more solar flares. When they're Earth facing, they actually create storms on Earth. They have radio blackouts, radiation storms that endanger astronauts out in outer space. The most powerful solar flare event was actually in 1859. It was called the Carrington event, and it created a superstorm all across the Earth. And it was the most powerful wallop from the sun recorded in our current history. So there's these practical pieces to solar flares and solar activity. But as anybody who's really tuned in and interested in this knows, they also have a huge correlation to emotions being activated, spiritual, components to it. If you can just imagine being bombarded by solar energy and what that might do physically, emotionally, spiritually, and otherwise, it's not just, storms and radio blackouts. It can also have a deeply personal impact. And so we may be heading into that right now, but we won't know until it's over. So now we're going to talk about lunestices, when the moon stands still. So the solar cycle is 1 year, but the solar max cycle can be 8 to 13 years, depending, what's going on. The lunar standstill cycle is 18.6 years, and it is connected to the nodes of the moon. If you know about the north node and the south node, yes, it's connected, and that's the same cycle number. It's based on the moon's relationship to the bounds of the sun. So remember when I was showing you these declinations, 23, 26, north for summer, south for winter. That is the bounds of the sun. The sun never goes higher than 23, 26, never goes lower than 23, 26 south, north and south. And most of the planets and the moon stay within the bounds of the sun, but sometimes they go out of bounds. And the lunar standstill cycle is connected to when the moon goes out of bounds. Once the moon gets past 23, 27, technically it's out of bounds, but the moon, the major lunar standstill, can go as high as 28 degrees, 28.725 degrees, which is like a full, almost 5.5 or 5 and whatever, 1/3 degrees beyond the sun. And there's an energy with the major lunar standstill that's kind of similar to the summer solstice sun. Because remember, the summer solstice sun goes really high, right? Well, the major lunar standstill, the moon can go really high. It can also, though, go really low. It does both. And I will be showing you images here. So there's a major, a minor, and an equalizing part of the cycle. And I really liken it to major summer solstice, minor winter solstice, and equalizing equinoxes. And I'm going to talk about the major first because it's kind of the most dramatic. It happens, the period is actually for like 1.5 to 2 years, and we're in it right now as I'm talking, and we're heading into it. And essentially, we will see the moon rises really further apart outside the range of the regular sunrise and sunset. If you recall where I showed you the sunset points, like the moon can rise and set outside the bounds of the sun. It can also go up and down beyond what the sun can do. So it essentially is this time where the moon becomes really prominent. The lunar energies are beyond what even the sun can access and the sun can touch into. So during the major lunar standstill, eclipses occur near the equinoxes, and it occurs when the North Node's in Aries, and that's essentially where we are now. Particularly when the North Node crosses 0 Aries, which happens in January of 2025, is like an important part of the cycle. But once it heads into Aries, we're heading into the major lunar standstill. The absolute maximum declination for the major lunar standstill is in March of 2025, and it occurs when the moons, the first quarter moon and the third quarter moon are at the equinox. So that's March 7th and March 22nd of 2025. So there's a similarity to the solstice sun to this major part of the cycle because it reaches higher than anything else, but it also reaches lower. So it swings. It's like a pendulum, if you will. So here's an image from astro.com with a beautiful stone circle because the stone circles are aligned to this and also to the sun, which we'll talk about in a moment. But here's the major standstill moon, the moon at the highest. It goes even higher than the summer solstice sun. And here's the lowest moonrise. It goes even lower than the winter solstice sun. So this happens once every 18.6 years. And the ancients were like, whoa, this is different. Like, we're not used to seeing the moon that high or the moon this low or the moon rising and setting so far, north and south of the rise and set points of the sun. And it was seen as incredibly significant and also spiritually significant. So the minor standstill is the opposite of the major. And this is an image from Universe Today. So the minor standstill is this line at the top of the yellow, and the major is this line at the bottom of the orange. So you can see the declinations of the moon, how different it can be. At the major, it gets up to 28 degrees and change. At the minor, it's at 18 degrees. So it's like a 10-degree difference. So essentially, the moon is closer to the ecliptic at the minor. It's not as dramatic of a visual, but tidal activity, fascinatingly, is higher. And during a minor lunar standstill, eclipses occur near the equinoxes, but the North Node is in Libra. So the eclipses are at the equinoxes for the major, but the North Node's in Aries, and the minor is reverse. And to me, this is very similar to the winter solstice sun because it's staying closer to the equator. It's not going to the extremes. The major part of this cycle goes beyond the sun. The minor actually goes less than the sun in declination. And then the final part of this is the equalizing standstill. And this is an image from exploreglobe.net. I feel that they're similar to the equinoxes, the equal day, equal night point, the equalizing points. And there's two of them. They're halfway between the minor and the major. And essentially, actually, the moon will reach the positions of the solstice sun. So either winter or summer. At major, it goes beyond those positions. At minor, it never even reaches those positions. At the equalizing, it reaches them precisely. And there's two equalized lunar standstills, one going from minor to major and one going from major to minor. And they happen with the North Node in Capricorn and Cancer. So if you notice, we've got all 4 of the Aries points being activated by the standstill cycle. So we've got 0 Aries, which is our spring equinox point in the Northern Hemisphere. That's the major standstill. When the North Node's at 0 Aries, it's the major standstill time. And then the 0 Cancer, which is summer solstice in the Northern Hemisphere, is the equalizing, moving from major to minor. And 0 Libra is our fall equinox point, and that's the minor standstill when the North Node is at 0 Libra. I was born at that one. And this is actually part of what got me into studying the cycles. I found out I was born at the minor standstill. I was like, what does it mean? And then I started studying it. And then 0 Capricorn, the winter solstice point, is equalizing, moving from minor to major. And my child was born at that one. So me and my kid are born in, tied into this cycle, which is interesting. So at the major, the moon will go higher in the sky than the summer sun. And then 2 weeks later, will go lower in the sky than the winter sun. At the minor, the moon won't even go as far as the sun at the solstice points. And then at the equalizing, it will reach exactly that. So we've essentially got the moon tracking, but also moving past the solar journey. And at the major lunar standstill, it goes beyond the sun. So just so you can think about maybe the past, the last major standstill was 2006, 2005 to 2006. The last minor was 2015. We're in the major now. It lasts for 1.5 to 2 years, so 2024 to 25. But there were also some in the past that I just want to point out. 1987, harmonic convergence, major lunar standstill. We also had a supernova then, and that I think was part of why that time was so powerful. 1968 to 69, anybody who was alive then knows that was the time of revolution, the late 60s. That was also a major lunar standstill. And our next one won't be till 2043. So, they're every 18.6 years. Now, this is the human design part. You don't need to know human design at all. All I want to point out is that these 4 Aries points correspond to something called the vessel of love in human design. It's in the G center, which is the heart center. It's the part of the chart that's like love and purpose and identity. It's called the seat of the soul. I call it the grail in our being. And these are 4 transcendent gates of love. These 4 Aries points, these points that correspond to the equinoxes and the solstices, that correspond to the 4 major phases of the lunar standstill cycle, are gates of transcendent love. So the vessel of love is like the grail in the heart, and it shows this potential of transcendent love, and it's anchored in the seat of the soul, and they each correspond to different types of love. So 0 Aries is love of the spirit. It's universal love. And 0 Cancer is love of humanity. So of all the people. And 0 Libra is love of the body, and your physical embodied experience. And then 0 Capricorn is love of the self and love of living. And so notice that spring and summer are very much about like divine love or loving divinity, right? It's love of spirit, love of humanity, which is like agape, unconditional love. But then fall and winter are about loving being human, loving your body, loving yourself, loving living and being here on the earth. And we are human and divine, so the vessel of love speaks to when we can be both human and divine. Can we love our spirit and our human self? Can we love our light and our shadow, our masculine and our feminine? Can we bring them into union? And then we become the living grail. Gene keys, which are based on human design, have these like keywords that are siddhis. Siddhi is like an Indian term for like a magical gift, sort of. It's like a highest frequency gift that comes through spirit when you're enlightened. And each of them correspond to something. So 0 Aries is universal love. 0 Cancer is fluorescence, which is that full radiance of the summer sun from the northern hemisphere perspective. 0 Libra is ecstasy, which, when you fully love your body and inhabit it, it can be ecstasy, all of it, the human and the divine. And then 0 Capricorn, gate 10, corresponds with being. And so being human, being yourself, and loving living. So it's interesting to me that the nodes at these 4 points are deeply tied into the major lunar standstill cycle. And literally, they get activated at the major, the minor, and the equalizing by the nodes and by the sun and moon when the sun and moon are squaring the nodes, creating a grand cross, activating all four of them. Particularly the major happens when the north node is at 0 Aries, when the node of destiny is aligned with universal love. And I actually feel that that's one of the biggest energies that comes through at the major lunar standstill. I think it was one of the points of the sacred sites, which we'll talk about in a second. So here's a visual from Universe Today, just so you can see visually. It helps me to see things visually. The one on the top was a minor lunar standstill, and you can see that the moon is hugging closer to the ecliptic. And the one on the bottom is the one that's coming up. It's major, and there's more, it moves further away. What happens when the moon goes out of bounds is it reaches other constellations that it couldn't reach before. So normally when it's within bounds, it goes through the 12, constellations, AKA signs of tropical and even Vedic astrology. But during the major, it actually can reach up to 18 constellations. And that's actually a big piece of the importance of the standstill. So here's this picture from Wikipedia, and it just shows you the constellations. The gray ones are the sign, well, actually, they're the constellations because they're showing them appropriately sized. You can see Virgo's way bigger than Cancer or even Aries. So this is not the evenly divided sky. In tropical and even Vedic, they take the constellations and divide them into 12, into even 30-degree slices. But the living sky does not look like that. Some of the constellations are bigger, some are smaller. There's, it's more chaotic. So normally the moon just goes through these 12 signs, but during the major lunar standstill, the moon reaches really high, right? 5 degrees or more above the sun's bounds, and it can connect with stars and constellations it doesn't usually connect with. Now, keep in mind, this is more striking if you live in higher latitudes. So you're going to see more of the extremity of this experience when you go farther north or farther south. So the out of bounds moon always happens in tropical Gemini Cancer, and particularly on the cusp, and tropical Sagittarius Capricorn on the cusp. And if you know your astrology, you know what's near there. That's the galactic center and the anti-galactic center. So the out of bounds moon actually reaches the galactic center and the anti-galactic center. And when we're at the major, we have the moon actually align with the galactic center and anti-galactic center, and also even, here's a visual. Here's the anti-galactic center between Taurus and Gemini. This is living sky. So in tropical, it's between Gemini and Cancer, but this is living sky, and there's 24 degrees difference between tropical positions and living sky. And the galactic center is over here by Ophiuchus, Sagittarius, Scorpius. So at the major, the moon can even reach into Auriga. And at the minor, the moon can reach down to Orion and up into Ophiuchus. And then at the equalizing, the moon can reach Sextans and Cetus. And some say Corvus, but I have to say I ran all the charts and I never once saw the moon going into Corvus. So maybe I missed it. Maybe it's there. I think it has a lot to do with how the astronomical boundaries of the constellations are determined, so maybe you just see it get closer to the raven. But it's meaningful to see the moon go closer to constellations that normally the moon doesn't go near. And also the sun never goes near. So here is a picture. I mentioned earlier, the maximum declination is actually going to be March 2025, and it always occurs at the first and third quarter moons near the equinox. So this is March 7th of 2025. These are images from Stellarium. I have them set for the Isle of Lewis in Scotland because it has a high declination, and there's a stone circle there that's tied into this that we'll be talking about shortly. So you can see here, the moon is way above the ecliptic. It's almost this is the anti-galactic center because we're over here by Taurus and Gemini. The anti-galactic center is 27 degrees, 11 minutes of Gemini right now. It does move very slowly by precession. And the galactic center is 2711 Sagittarius. And you can see it's like right up here by Auriga, and it's very close, right? It's like almost at the galactic center, just beneath it. And this is the other quarter moon in March 22nd, which is closer to the actual equinox. And you can see here, the moon is even more closely aligned with the galactic center. This happens in the major. In the major lunar standstill, the moon aligns with the galactic center and the anti-galactic center. It doesn't do that in the minor or the equalizing. So this is a big feature of what makes this a powerful time. So what is the galactic center and the anti-galactic center, and why does it even matter? So this is an image from Lisa Renee at Energetic Synthesis. It's one of the best visuals I've seen, actually, of the galactic center. So here's our sun. Here's our Earth. Our Earth goes around the sun. Here's the ecliptic. Here's the galactic plane. Galactic center is the center of our Milky Way galaxy. So just like our sun is the center of our solar system, the galactic center is the center around which our solar system goes around, and our solar system and lots of other things. So the galactic center is pointing towards the center of our galaxy. The anti-galactic center is opposite, as you can see here. What's interesting about the anti-galactic center is it's actually pointing to the galactic edge. And what lies beyond the galactic edge? Everything else out there in the universes, in the cosmos. You know, this is like order of influence or something. It's like, yeah, we live on Earth and we see our sun and it looks so important, but actually if we were to go out wide angle, our sun is really small compared to the galactic center. But then if we were to go out into even wider angle, our galaxy is really small compared to all these other galaxies. And it's this order of magnitude, if you will. And one of the ways you can call or reference the galactic center and the anti-galactic center, they're called the Golden Gate and the Silver Gate, or Golden Gateway, Silver Gateway. They're also called the Gate of God and the Gate of Man. And I personally prefer to call them the gate of the galactic sun and the gate of the galactic moon, or the gate of the father and the gate of the mother. We're seen as coming in through the gate of man, the silver gate, because we're born of the womb of the great cosmic mother. And then when we die, we return to the father or the galactic sun via the gate of God when we exit. So the golden gate points to the center of our galaxy, whereas the silver gate is like the exit point out of our galaxy and, speaks to what lies beyond. So these are really important gateways for our galaxy, and they're intimately tied into the major lunar standstill. One of the most dramatic parts of the major lunar standstill occurs at the full moons near the solstices, when the sun and the moon are straddling these gateways. And remember, the out of bounds moon only goes out of bounds when it's near these gateways. So Alwyn, if you've heard of Alwyn, it's a Celtic term. It literally means inspiration, Holy Spirit, ether, the fifth element, quintessence, whatever you want, whatever term works for you. And the symbol for Alwyn typically is shown as the one on the left. But actually, Alwyn goes both ways. It both descends down and it also arises up from within. So I actually couldn't find another one that showed it the other way. I just had to take this one and turn it upside down. So the three lines and the dots are the Trinity. So body, mind, and spirit, love, power, and wisdom, masculine, feminine, and divine child that's created in their union. Underworld, upper world, middle world. It also symbolizes land, sea, and sky. And the summer solstice to the ancient Druids, out of all the equinoxes and solstices, was the most important. It was called Albenheffen, which means light of the shore. And the shore was the time where the land, sea, and sky meet, or the place, sorry. So when you're at the shore, you see the land, you see the water, you see the sky, all three come together. And the summer solstice was seen as the time of the Trinity being able to be brought into union. It was actually the most powerful of these gateways to the ancient Druids. And Alwyn is not just something that descends down on us, although it does, you know, inspiration. If you've ever been inspired, right? It often feels like some light went on in your head, you know, or something just kind of came down from the universe into and lit everything up, illuminated, right? That's the descent of Awen. That's the inspiration that comes from the heavens, descends to earth and comes into us through our crown. But there's also the rise of Awen, the ascent of Awen. That's the inspiration that either comes from the earth and comes up through your body, or it arises from within. It's your own Kundalini waking up and going upwards. And Awen goes both ways. It mirrors the solar cycle. It mirrors the lunar cycle. So there's up and down, and there's major and minor, and there's winter and summer, and there's yin and yang. And it's just, you know, this cycle that just keeps turning and going. One is not better than the other, although there are some traditions and teachings that say one is better than the other. So back to the gates of the vessel of love. What does it mean to have these gates be connected to the major lunar standstill cycle, but also the solar cycle with the equinoxes and the solstices? They're essentially the gates of the vessel of love. And so activating all four of them, which is, you know, part of the work of being human, right? To really truly love spirit, to really truly love humanity, to really truly love your body, which means honoring your body and taking care of your body, to truly love yourself and love being alive and being here right now. All of them, when they're activated, it's becoming the embodiment of love. It's anchoring love in the grail of our hearts. And whenever you see these pictures of like Jesus and Mary, and they have these radiant hearts that are like bleeding, they've got like thorns on it, and there's usually blood dripping, but it's also like all this light coming out. It's literally showing that their transcendent gates of love are fully activated and opened. And I think this is the most profound aspect of the major lunar standstill, is tapping into this energy, this capacity for your heart to be fully opened. Daniel Giamario, sorry, I hope I'm pronouncing his name correct. He has an article where he talks about, I think he was there, he was there for 1987, or was it the 2006 one? I'm sorry, I can't remember the date. But he talked about this moment during the actual standstill at Scotland, and I'll explain why Scotland's so important. He got hit in the heart with this massive light, and he started crying. And all the negativity and the anxiety and the worries and everything melted away, and he just felt like he was just overflowing with love. Like, I have chills actually as I'm saying it, because this is the potential of this time. And yes, being at a sacred site that's anchored to it can be wonderful, but you can also just tune into this summer. So the sun and the moon, you know, there are two lights, our luminaries. The sun is active and radiant. The moon is passive and receptive. The sun is our source of light in our solar system. It transmits and radiates light. The moon is the chalice that receives the light. It reflects the light. So we've got the yang and the yin, essentially. And the full moons at the winter and summer solstice are really important in the major lunar standstill. You know, the full moon at winter, we're going to have the sun at the lowest point because it's winter. And if it's a full moon, the moon is opposite the sun. So the moon is going to be super high at the winter solstice and major lunar standstill. It's the reverse at summer, because summer we have the sun at the highest point. So the full moon's going to have to be at the lowest point. And at the major lunar standstill, it goes really low. And so they're essentially these two lights are reflecting each other, and they're receiving or transmitting light to each other. When the moon comes to the earth at the summer solstice, it brings that light to the earth. Literally in Scotland, what happens is the moon walks the land. And I'm going to show an image of that in a moment. I like to take gender out of this discussion because then it goes, you have to be masculine yang, I have to be feminine yin. We all have masculine and feminine. We all have solar and lunar. So I like to just look at it as like solar is yang, not masculine, but yang. Yang is active. Yang is moving and doing things, whereas lunar is yin. Solar is radiant, lunar is reflective. Solar is active, lunar is passive. And we've been in a culture that's been overly young, overly externally focused and motivated, overly identified with the sun, and especially the lowest aspect of the sun, which is the ego. The symbol for the sun is a circle with a dot. The dot is the ego self. The circle is the total self, the higher self, if you will. And in your sun, you do have the potential to access your higher self, but a lot of us are stuck in our small selves and don't really realize who our full higher self is. And the work is to remember that and embody it. So for me, a big part of the lunar standstill cycle, making the moon be so much more prominent than the sun, is bringing back the feminine, bringing us back in touch with that lunar yin, receptive, reflective energy that has been largely lost in Western culture and devalued and, tucked away. So this is a picture of Shiva. He's a Hindu god. He's sitting on a moon. He's got a moon up in his head. He's totally connected to the lunar energies, actually. And he is a very lunar masculine being. The way that I actually see the feminine and masculine is I see it as a quaternity. So there's solar feminine and lunar feminine. There's solar masculine and lunar masculine. And Shiva is definitely a lunar masculine being. He's very in touch with his feminine essence, and his receptivity, his love, his compassion. And the sun, activates the outer. The sun activates our action in the world, our will, our drive. The moon activates the inner, the soul, the spirit, our feminine essence. And the major lunar standstill actually helps us tap into that and actually has the capacity, I believe, to open all four gates of love in our heart. The way that Daniel described it, I was just like, oh yeah, that's exactly what happened. Will everybody experience it that way? Not necessarily, but it's there for everybody to try and access or set their intention to access. So there's many sacred sites that align with the major lunar standstill and also the solar standstill, but these are ones that are known for major lunar standstill alignments. So the Callanish Standing Stones in Scotland, Stonehenge, they're actually going to study the major lunar standstill this year and next year. There's articles all over the internet about it because they're saying, we think Stonehenge has a major lunar standstill alignment, but we're not sure. We're going to study it, this major lunar standstill. So Boscawen is an amazing lunar stone circle in Penzance, England. It's actually one of my favorite stone circles. Newgrange has a lunar alignment. Carrowkeel Cairns in Ireland does. I've been there. It's amazing. Begmore Stone Circle. I have not been there, and it's now at the top of my list because I just learned about this one preparing for this PowerPoint. It looks amazing. I'm like, I see the pictures and I'm like, oh my God, I have to go there. So I gotta plan another Ireland trip. We also have some in America. They're very sacred to the Native American tribes connected to the land. They tracked this cycle, this major lunar standstill cycle. So Chaco Canyon, New Mexico, Chimney Rock, Colorado, the Hopewell sites in Ohio all have major lunar standstill alignments. This is a picture of the moon, looks like the sun, but it's the moon at the Callanish Standing Stones. So the Callanish Standing Stones are up on the Isle of Lewis in Scotland. And when the sun at the highest point in summer, it has a full moon, the full moon closest to the summer solstice. When the sun sets and the moon rises, the moon actually rises very low to the ground. And what it does is it just rises at the top of these mountains and appears to walk on the mountains. Doesn't ever go any higher. And this happens because the summer solstice, the sun is at a high declination. So the moon is going to have to be opposite to be a full moon. And it's also the major lunar standstill. So it's going to be massively opposite, very low. And there's this striking experience of the moon walking on the body of the earth. And they saw the mountain range as the body of the Great Mother. They saw it as the old Kaliak bear, the old woman of the moors, or they call it Sleeping Beauty, Earth Mother, Mother Earth. And the moon appears to come out of her body, walk across her body, and then disappears back inside, goes back down beneath the mountain range. And it's literally this amazing symbol of the moon, the yin, the feminine, coming down to earth and being reborn from the Great Mother. Like it's like this striking, experience. And now to be clear, I haven't seen it yet. I'm going this summer. And you can go see it this summer or next summer because it is a 2-year cycle. You can see it happen. And I was there last summer. I was there in August, not in summer solstice. So here is an image. The moon aligns with the precise galactic center on the summer solstice full moon this year. So about 8 hours before the full moon is exact, the moon crosses right in front of the galactic center. If you remember the other images, it came close. One was a little further, one was closer, but not exact. This is exact. So what happens this summer is the moon goes across the galactic center, connects with the, center of our Milky Way galaxy, then comes and rises out of the body of the Great Mother, Earth, births and rebirths the moon, and then gets taken back into her. And it's a precise alignment. Not close, not really close, but exact. And here's it closer. That's a closer visual. You see, the moon is exactly going across the galactic center. This is on June 21st, about 8 hours before the full moon. The full moon will be like 2:08 a.m. on the 22nd UK time. So it's like this amazing cosmic dance. And it's, you read into everything. Everything is symbolic. So you got to be very Jungian and archetypal with this. I mean, but to be honest, you don't even have to. I've read accounts of people who are not, super archetypal or spiritual, and they see this happen, and it's a profound, life-changing experience to witness, when they're like, I had no idea. Like, so kind of reminds me of when people go out to outer space for the first time. A lot of them have like spiritual awakenings or crises. They start crying, like it should just all of a sudden see the earth differently is a radical shift in consciousness. So to see the moon in this way and having it come down into the body of Mother Earth is just very profound. This is a picture by Gerald Pointing, and this is the mountain range that the moon walks. So here you see it. This is the moon. And it'll rise and it'll just walk across the land here. It'll stay low, close to the body of the mother. I'm excited to see it. And there's also this really cool thing that happens. There's this hill at the site. And if somebody stands in it after the moon has walked the land for a while and then passes through the stones, they can stand and they will get illuminated by the moon like this. And it's supposed to be this amazing, experience. I mean, the problem is only one person can do that. It's not like everybody who's there visiting can take a turn. It's like a quick thing. And very likely, actually, I wouldn't even say very likely. I would just say, yes, the ancients saw this, knew this. Probably the high priestess or high priest would be the one standing there to be activated by the moon for a ritual or a ceremony at the time of the major lunar standstill. So my theory is that this year is huge. 2024, June 2024, and I know my talk is airing like a few days before that, before the solstice and the full moon. So we have the summer solstice, sun at the highest point. We have that every year. We have solar maximum possibly happening this year. We have the major lunar standstill with the moon out of bounds, aligning with the galactic center, actually crossing the galactic center exact hours before the moon rises to walk the land in Scotland, but this event is happening all over the planet. And there's also, oh, I forgot to mention this. There's possible supernova happening. The scientists are saying that there's going to be a supernova in Corona Borealis, which is associated with the goddess Arianrod, who, thinking back to the slide with the Awen, the inspiration, she actually was the goddess who not bequeathed the Awen, she was the source of it. She was the star and moon goddess who was the source of Awen and inspiration. And literally, she's seen as living in Corona Borealis, and we're supposed to have maybe a supernova happening there this summer or fall. And in 1987, at the harmonic convergence, we had major lunar standstill, and we also had a supernova, which I just find interesting. It just makes it to me like this time is important. This is a quote by Jonathan Caner, the late Jonathan Caner. He's an astrologer who passed away, I think, a few years ago. I used to read him all the time when I was young and studying astrology. So he has something to say about this. At the peak of a lunar standstill, the moon exudes a special kind of energy. Mystical places have the power to draw down and capture this, rather like aerials picking up radio transmission. Then they amplify the signal and rebroadcast it all along the secret lines of power that connect these ancient sacred sites. According to tradition, lunar standstills re-energize ley lines, causing them to widen dramatically and send out stronger signals. So essentially this year and next year in the major lunar standstill, we have, according to him, our grid is going to be broadening out and becoming a blanket of energy covering every inch of the land. I love that quote. So what does it mean? The summer solstice energy with the moon higher than the sun is the exaltation of the feminine principle at the time of the gate of enlightenment. The moon as chalice and vessel receives the light of the stars and the galactic center, and then an anti-galactic center, and then brings it down to Earth. And it happens twice a month. During the major lunar standstill, the moon aligns at the galactic center and the anti-galactic center once each month. And then the moon walking the land, you can only see that at certain places like in Scotland, but it brings the lunar feminine energies to Earth and it rebirths the feminine on the Earth. And it's actually tied to a prophecy, the return of the shining ones. So the shining ones, this is a picture of the Riders of the City, the Tua de Danann by John Duncan. They're a supernatural Irish race, and they're the children of the goddess Danu, and they're called the Shining Ones. They would literally glow. They'd be opalescent. They'd be lit up by a light within. And you can see here, like, this one has a snake on its head. This one has a dragon. This one has its head lit up like a saint. It literally is showing that their Kundalini Shakti is fully activated and it's come all the way to the crown. They're fully awakened. They're enlightened beings. And the shining ones are these enlightened beings. Were they aliens? Did they come from other places? I don't know. Were they gods or goddesses, or did they appear to be that way? I don't know. But what I do know is we can be shining ones. And what does it mean to have your heart fully open and radiant? What does it mean to fully shine? When we're in love, we shine, right? When you're fully in love, like you just are radiant. And babies shine. When they first are born and they come out, you just see the purity of their soul and their spirit in their eyes. It's why people love babies. You know, they're just pure little love machines. And that openness and receptivity, that purity of the soul can shine through. And for me, that is a big piece of what the Major Lunar Standstill is about. So how can you work with this personally? I would look at where the out of bounds moon transits in your chart. So you're looking at the moon in tropical Gemini, Cancer, Sagittarius, Capricorn, especially on the cusp, because that's by the galactic center and the anti-galactic center. Twice a month, the moon is going to go out of bounds. It's going to go beyond what the sun can even access, and it's going to activate that part of your chart by house, if there's a planet there, if there's an angle there. You know, also paying attention to where the galactic center and anti-galactic center are located in your chart, seeing it as the source of light from our universe, as well as the source of light that lies beyond. That's not even just about our universe, it's about what's even greater than that. And you can see these parts of your chart as areas of life or areas of yourself that have the capacity to tap into that wisdom. I personally think it's best to look at the houses from an esoteric perspective when you're working with galactic points, because galactic points are not about the small self. They're not about the ego. So the esoteric meaning of the houses is more significant when you're talking about this. So I'm going to give you some keywords just so you can play with it. So the first house in esoteric astrology is your soul's purpose, and has to do with your auric field, what people feel in your field and how you express. The second house is your life energy and prana, and your spiritual resources and your spiritual values. Third house esoteric is mind energy, mental telepathy, soul, spirit, brothers and sisters. Fourth house is the house of the Great Mother. It's also the foundation of the soul and your connection to source. It's where you came from before and what you carry with you in this life. It's like in the bedrock of your soul. Fifth, esoteric is spiritual will, higher self actualization. This is the house of the sun. Remember, so like the little dot is the small self, but we're going for the big circle around the dot. And the fifth house, which is normally the house of the sun in Leo, actually can be the house connected to the capacity to actualize your higher self when you're reaching for more than just that little dot. Also, this is the house of living from the truth of your heart. Sixth house is the house of being of service. It's connected to spiritual health and your connection to animals. Seventh house is the house of divine union, soulmates, and the union of masculine and feminine within. Eighth house is the house of spiritual transformation, transmutation, and rebirth. Ninth house is the higher mind and higher truths, like capital T, truth. Teachers, teachings, being a teacher, being a student. 10th house is your spiritual purpose, your life path, your calling and your mission, like why you're here, what you're meant to do in the world. 11th house is your visions, your hopes and dreams, your service to humanity, and your soul community or spirit group. And finally, 12th house in esoteric is selflessness and surrender. It's a very psychic, intuitive house, actually. This is the house where we can merge back into the primordial waters of origin. And it can be great for channeling and intuition and dreams. So explore the houses esoterically. And then you can also look at where these 4 Aries points, fall in your chart and play with the energies I've just talked about, the love of spirit, 0 Aries, or that, new beginning energy, that spring resurrection energy. Where does that fall in your chart? What house, what planet, whatever, and go through, all of them. I do also have here with Sagittarius and Gemini, which is the galactic center and the anti-galactic center. It's important with Sagittarius to be more committed to the truth than you are to being right. And with Gemini, it's really important to be willing to come back to beginner's mind, that place where you're like, I don't know, universe, show me the way. And those are some of the most practical ways of working with the galactic center Sagittarius energy and the anti-galactic center Gemini energy. Also, I really recommend engaging with the living sky. This is ritual in action. So go out and look at the moon every night. Where does it rise? Where does it set? If you watch this over throughout years, you're going to start noticing the major lunar standstill cycle. But if you're just starting right now, pay attention to how it is now. Tune into the moon phases and new moon, full moon, dark moon. Notice the constellations the moon's moving through at night. Notice the rise and set of the sun. When its equinoxes go out, find due east and west located on your horizon where you live, where you are, where your foundation is. Notice how the sun, rises and sets more south in the winter and more north in the summer. Tune into the 8 holy gateways of the sun and work with them, honoring both the ascension and descension part of the cycle. Tune into the lunar gateways, which are the new moons, and visit sacred sites. And, there's a lot of sacred sites. So there's beautiful ones like the stone circles, but we also have sacred sites in our own places we live that we don't even know. It could just be like a tree in the forest. It could be like this little hill up on that mountain, and finding these sites in your own land, finding sacred sites close to you can be a really beautiful thing to do because it helps anchor you into the land that you live on. This was like what Native, Americans and Hawaiians and the different tribes and indigenous peoples did. They were deeply connected to their land. One of the issues with astrology is we're very often heady, so we're like looking at a chart, looking at a computer, casting a chart. What does it mean? Let's think about it. Let's analyze it. But the original astrology was the living sky. It was intimately connected to the sky and the land that you lived on. You looked up at the heavens with your feet on the ground. You built your sacred sites, aligning with the sun and the moon and the stars. So an important part of working with this is being in your body and feeling it, not just thinking about it. And then last, you can view your natal chart on Stellarium. It's actually really fun to put your birth time, place, location, and see the living sky the moment you were born. This is my birth chart. So I was born when the moon was rising in Aquarius, in living sky Aquarius. I actually have moon in Pisces in tropical astrology. And you can actually see what was happening the moment you were born, what was rising, what was setting, what was culminating. There's also a report, it's called a starlight report that, not Demetra George, sorry, I'm spacing on her name right now. And I know her name, so it's bugging me. But anyhow, she's an amazing astrologer that's done all this work on fixed stars, and she has tons of books, and her name's going to come to me as soon as we're done here. But I sell it on my website, but there's other people that sell it. But it literally will give you a report that shows you your stars that were rising, setting, culminating, and on the IC at the time of your birth. And it's not the stars that you can eyeball in a chart. It has to do with declinations and the visible sky the moment you're born. And it's very interesting. I really think like coming back to the living sky teachings is an important piece to ground astrology and kind of bring it down and in. That's me with the sun at my crown on the tour in Glastonbury. So this summer solstice and full moon, you guys are getting this a few days before that. The solstice is Thursday, June 20th at 4:51 p.m. Eastern time. The full moon is Friday, the 21st at 9:08 p.m. Eastern time, but you have to adjust for your time zone accordingly. I really recommend engaging with this solstice portal and this full moon and this major lunar standstill. Go out and celebrate. the highest solar light, the highest lunar light. Go out and look at the full moon, call in the light, do ritual, do ceremony, be out in nature, be on the land, visit a sacred site, build a sacred site in your backyard. Also, remember that you are a sacred site. Your body is a temple. And this portal of time, and it really, the major lunar standstill is this year into next year. So it's not just these few days after my talk goes live, it carries into next year, but use the light at this time to illuminate your being, to turn the lights on, so to speak, and remember who you are. So that's what I'll be doing in Scotland. And that's my logo. Okay. So that is my talk on calling in the lights and working with the sun and the moon and the solstices and the standstills, and throw in, you know, a supernova and perhaps solar maximum. And I just think that this is a very powerful, powerful time, particularly this year, but carries into next year too.
And next year, we're going to have all these planets changing signs, and Saturn, Neptune practically conjunct next summer. It's really a powerful energetic portal, isn't it?
And that'll be conjunct the Aries point.
Just about. I mean, it'll
Yes.
just miss it, not really hitting till February 26th, but
Yep.
that's it. That's
Yep.
you know, that's
Yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah.
Harmony, thank you as always for just not just a beautiful presentation, but for pouring so much of yourself into it. And you're not even done. Before you leave,
Oh, yeah.
tell everybody, I know, and you got to run, but
Oh, no, it's
tell
okay.
tell everybody about your gift, which, you know,
Oh,
is
yes.
they can access right from your speaker page.
Yeah, so my gift is Anchoring the Age of Aquarius. It's a masterclass. It's like 2 hours, or maybe it's 2.5. I can't remember. And it's all about the turning of the ages. And there's a lot of different discussions, even arguments about, are we in the age of Aquarius? Are we not? I will just tell you, full disclosure, from the way that the ancients calculated ages, yes, we are in the age of Aquarius, and we have been since the 1500s. And I talk about it. I talk about why and how they calculated the ages. And more importantly, what it means. We're in it, you know, it's a 2,160-year cycle. So we've only just dipped our toe in the pool of it, if you will. And I talk about the connection to the divine feminine, to Sirius, how to, you know, become aware of your own contribution to the age. I go through a bunch of stuff. So mythology, astrology, astronomy, archetype.
All the good
So
stuff.
all the good stuff. My favorite things.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And thank you for that gift. Thank you for this presentation. It was really great. Thanks for everything.
Thank you.
And I invite everybody watching, do that. Get to know Harmony through her website, through her social media sites. All of the links are right on her speaker page. Download the gift and be sure to show up tomorrow for another great interview on the Soul Centered Astrology Summit. So until then, bye for now.
Bye.